The climate change summit meeting in Lima, taking place now, is a critical step for international community to have a universal, very meaningful climate change agreement in Paris next year. I expect and I urge the member states to come out with a draft negotiating text in Lima, which will pave a foundation for member states to negotiate for another year next year. It's imperative that international community should have a clear, universal and meaningful climate change document which will be applicable to all the people, all the countries in the world by next year.
There was perhaps some over-eagerness, and you'll remember this, in Copenhagen in 2009. A lot of hype and energy in creating what you called sealing the deal at the time.
Yes.
So here we are 5 years later, and on a personal level, Mr. Secretary General, and I want to emphasize on a personal level, how frustrating has this process been for you?
Looking back to 5 years in Copenhagen, I realized that member states were not ready yet at that time. The situation has changed. The situation and circumstances are much, much different now from 5 years ago. For example, political, social, economic situations have changed, and there is a greater political will and awareness by the world leaders, as have been demonstrated during the climate change summit meeting in September.
And yet we still have skeptics. What do you say to those skeptics that question the science?
There were skeptics, and there may continue to be some skeptics for political reasons, for some other reasons, but now the world is now speaking based on the evidence, scientific evidence. The world scientists have made it clear without any ambiguity, with a greater clarity now. So it's time for international community to act now. We have been discussing this matter during the last 20 years, always talking and talking without agreeing.
It's a bit like UN reform.
UN reform, we've been making some progress. As a Secretary General, I have been really making a lot of reform measures, administrative measures. Of course, there is a Security Council reform and other bigger issues. But as far as the administrative management is concerned, we've been much, much more effective and efficient.
The South African government prides itself on the Durban Platform of Action, which really has set the stage for us, hopefully, to achieve this legal deal in Paris next year. What do you make, sir, of South Africa's role in these negotiations to date, and what would you like to see from the government moving forward?
South Africa government is one of the what we call basic countries, and with all this economic and technological development and the national power, South African government, we expect, will play a very constructive role in Lima and in Paris. We really strongly count on the leadership of President Zuma in South Africa.
Do you, though, support this notion of a common but differentiated responsibility when it comes to these negotiations? How do you see that principle affecting the negotiations moving forward?
That is the agreement already done by the international community, and I fully support this common but differentiated responsibilities.
Which means more from the developed countries who are most responsible for climate change.
That is why I'm saying that this campaign should be led by and supported by the developed world.
Once we have a binding legal instrument on the table, it then becomes part of international law, you agree? And yet we live in a world where international law is violated on a daily basis with impunity, sir. The deal will have to be enforced somehow. What role does the UN play after we have a ratified treaty on the table?
I hope that when member states negotiate, they will also look at the aspect of monitoring and verifications and accountability. When there is no such mechanisms, the agreement can just be an agreement which may not be implemented.
Meaningless.
Or meaningless. That is what the member states are focusing very much in their negotiation. And I'm sure that member states will be very much conscious of this aspect. And there should also be, this agreement should be accompanied with tools, means, the financing.
The Green Bank?
Yes.
But in an environment, sir, though, where we experience greater donor fatigue, as it were, the Deputy Secretary General was speaking to this in terms of humanitarian emergency appeals that become a regular occurrence at the UN. Are you therefore confident that we can ensure $100 billion every year from 2020?
It may be difficult, practically speaking, to expect all $100 billion from public funds, from government.
So the private sector.
So it is important to forge a strong and close partnerships with private sector and philanthropic organization.
You are in the last few years of your tenure as UN Secretary General. Do you attach any value to what a deal on climate change will mean for your legacy at the helm of the UN for 10 years?
Well, I'm working as a Secretary General for the humanity and common prosperity and common well-being of the international community.
But I'm asking about you today.
Of course, I want to be remembered as a Secretary General who has really made a great contribution in making firm foundation where whole international community people can be put on the path toward the sustainable development, including the climate change. That is what I have been doing. I will continue to do until last day of my mandate.
Good luck in Lima. I know you go next week. Come back with some good news.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary General.